Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in this video I'm going to be going over some of the recent patch notes for February 1st that we got. Notably, it contains some class changes, some balance tuning, as well as some nerfs to the Tyrannical affix, and some tank buster abilities. I don't want to waste too much time, so let's just hop into it, starting with the class tuning. So we saw a bunch of underperforming specs get some flat percent buffs in this patch. Notably, that's Frost Death Knights, Havoc Demon Hunters, Beastmaster and Survival Hunters, Frost Mages, Assassination Rogues, Enhancement Shamans, Destruction Warlocks, and then Arms and Fury Warriors. Now, this should come to no surprise to a lot of people, as if I'm sure a lot of you have seen this chart here on Warcraft Logs, but it's pretty much all of these bottom specs, with the exception of Subtlety Rogue, saw a flat percent buff. Now, I know a lot of people are a bit unhappy with these changes because, hey, I mean, these flat percent changes, they're not going to fix what is wrong with a lot of these specs, because a lot of them is not just a damage number. There's a couple where it's just a damage thing, but for the most part, a lot of people aren't happy with how some of these specs are playing and interacting. And I guess my response to that is, I mean, we're mid tier in a hotfix. I don't know what people are expecting there to be, but frankly, I mean, I'm happy that they are doing something. A lot of those mechanical changes tend to happen either on a new expansion or in a big patch, and seeing as a lot of guilds are still progressing, and a lot of it's a hotfix, right? It's not a major patch, it's just a hotfix. I think them at least addressing that some specs are underperforming and trying to bring them up a little bit, I think is good and is a good change. And frankly, I mean, we just had the last of changes, 2 weeks ago, and they're still balancing now, which is a lot different than they were doing in BFA, where, I mean, balance patches were few and far between, right? They didn't happen every 2 weeks like they're happening now. So I am at least happy that they are doing changes and that they are continuing to do changes as they see problems. So that's my opinion on these changes. Moving on, we have the dungeon stuff. So, first, bosses gain 30% increased health when Tyrannical affix is active, was 40%. So a flat 10% nerf, or 25% overall nerf to that. That's a big change. In general, Tyrannical was definitely seen as harder. It's been seen as harder since it was introduced back in Legion. It's definitely a needed nerf. It's been especially bad in Shadowlands, as I'm sure a lot of you who have been running keys have noticed. It's definitely a difficult affix. Frankly, I still think it's going to be harder than Fortified. Even with this nerf, it's a good start. It needed the nerf, for sure. 100% needed the nerf. I still think it's going to be harder than Fortified. Fortified is still going to be your push weeks, but as long as that gap is closing, and I think I've said my opinion on Fortified and Tyrannical several times already, but frankly, I think they should both be removed. They're boring affixes. They're remnants of the original Mythic Plus system in Legion. And since then, pretty much every affix has seen some changes, or been removed or replaced. And I think it's about time Tyrannical and Fortified get knocked out, even if you want to increase the base scaling on dungeons. But that's just my opinion. From there, tank buster nerfs. These are really, really big, and for the most part, DPS players, you're not going to notice these changes whatsoever because it's just damage changes. But man, tanks and even healers, they're going to be quite happy. Starting with the other side, in the mechanical wing, the big dog, as well as the clients that are right near the dog, they all had their damage nerfed. So Metallic Jaws, 33% damage reduction, and that AoE stun it does now prefers non-tanks. Huge, because anytime that targeted a tank, you knew you were in for a bad time. The clients themselves, they have a 40% reduced melee damage, and their discharge, 33% damage reduction. So big damage reductions across the board there for those pulls. Then the Deathwalkers in Hakar's area, they had their melees reduced by 25%, and then their AoE bleed is now cast less frequently. So melee DPS players will notice that they'll be taking less damage there, and tanks will be a lot happier because, yeah, those guys would crush you. Next, Mist Eternal Scythe, the Soul Cleavers in the first section of the dungeon. There's Soul Split, which is that big tank burst that does the magic dot, or the magic debuff rather, 40% reduced damage. That's going to be a lot less scary. Rotting Slime Claws in Plaguefall. So that's after the first boss. Between the first and second boss, I believe is where they all are. They deal 50% less damage with their corroded claws. I know I have died repeatedly to those guys because their corroded claws, they're uninterruptible, right? You have to stun or CC to stop it, and it deals a ton of damage. Now it's half that damage. That's huge, huge nerf. Sanguine Depths, the Gargoyle Boys, 50% damage reduction on their frontal cone initial damage. So that bleed is still going to truck you, but you're at least not going to be sent to low health to begin that bleed. So that is nice. Frenzied Ghouls, Shadow Claws, very similar to the Rotting Slime Claws, Corroded Claws. These guys were locked in cages around that inner circle, which you would often have to unlock and end up killing them all. But they're just now easier to deal with because they are cast much less frequently, so that's good. Insatiable Brutes, which are the big Crixus-looking guys in the front part of the dungeon. 21% reduced damage on the slam, which is good. The slam wasn't hitting as hard as some of these other abilities, so it definitely didn't need as big of a hit. But it did have a cast frequency reduction, which is really nice. This is definitely a solid change. Spires of Ascension, Ether Divers. They are Venom, cast less frequently. That was definitely very spooky, especially if you didn't have like a Demon Hunter with the AoE silence, and you didn't have too many interrupts because you would get a lot of stacks, you would get a Dispel, and then before your healer could Dispel you again, you would get a bunch more stacks. So this is a nice change. And then the Dark Lash ability has a higher cast time. This is kind of, it's a mediocre change. It'll reduce your overall damage in that pack because it'll take longer for them to cast Dark Lashes. But I believe Dark Lash was a random damage event. Not 100% on that one, but either way, cast time reduction, that's less overall damage taken. So we'll take that. Necrotic Wake, the Bone Carver's Bone Flay bleed damage reduced by 70%, and the duration was cut in half from 10 to 20 seconds. That is huge. These guys, especially, if you let that cast go off, it trucked your tanks, and it was there for 20 seconds. So you had to just deal with it. So that is absolutely huge. Then we also had apparently a bug fix where armor was reducing that bleed damage. So apparently, it was dealing less damage than it should have, and then they nerfed it by 70%. So that's definitely very, very good. As a tank, I am very, very happy for this change. On top of that, in Necrotic Wake, the Skeletal Marauders, which are the big dudes that cast the Bone Shield, their frontal cone is just cast less frequently. That's nice as well. It hit fairly hard, but it wasn't too terrible to deal with. But hey, less damage is less damage. Last up, Theater of Pain. The Unyielding Contenders, these are the two guys at the beginning. Their Vicious Strike damage reduced by 20%. That's fine. They weren't too bad as well. And I think in general, Theater of Pain, these were the less egregious adds. But nerfs are nerfs, and as a tank player, and as I'm sure healer players are happy as well. This is good. The Ossified Conscripts, which I believe are the guys in Zav's wing, they had their Cruel Slash frequency reduced as well, but again, they weren't too terrible to deal with. But less damage is less damage overall. This was aimed, they say, at the kite meta. What is this going to do about the kite meta? Honestly, for hierarchies, not much. The big problem is not just these ability damages. These ability damages definitely don't help with the kite meta, but the biggest problem is for sure the damage white hits are doing, right? Just regular old auto attacks are absolutely trucking tanks right now. It's not about the abilities. The abilities are nice, but those auto attacks right now are the reason the kite meta exists, right? And that's just going to be a thing. I don't know if that's even possible for Blizzard to get rid of, because people are always going to push higher and higher keys, and then eventually at these highest level of keys, you're pretty much always going to get into a kite meta, right? It happened in BFA, it definitely happened in Legion, and it's happening now already. So I mean, it is the way it is for pushing high keys. What this does though is, I think mid-level keys, you won't really need to kite as much because you're not going to be afraid of just instantly losing 75% of your health from missing one of these abilities. So in less coordinated groups and in mid-level keys, I think you won't be forced to do this kite meta type stuff. But in terms of high-level keys, it's still going to happen. It's inevitable. There's nothing you can do about it. It just is that way. But that is pretty much it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe, and feel free to check out my stream on Twitch, where I raid lead and push high keys as a Guardian Druid, and that's at Tactics. Bugs aside, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.